All right, still with us to discuss, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, so much to discuss here. Just as a baseline, as I mentioned, involuntary manslaughter in Michigan is interesting because many states, the max you can get is like 3 years, 5 years. The max in Michigan is 15 years, but it's 1 to 15. There's a big gap there because I guess there are a lot of fact patterns that can fit into involuntary manslaughter, give some discretion to the court and prosecutors in asking for time, and I kind of like that. Here we have a wide discretion. The state wants 10 years. They want to go above the recommended sentence of 7. The defendants want 2.5 years, which would be time served. They would essentially walk out of jail, which is below a downward departure from what is recommended for first-time offenders. I want to get your thoughts on where you stand on the sentence in this case.
I have some insight on this. I called an actual felony judge in Detroit, right? This is in the Pontiac courthouse, right? This is about 40 minutes away from Detroit. Same system, same law. I called this felony judge. He's a good friend of mine, and I asked him. He's the judge on these cases all the time, right? I didn't tell him I was talking about the Crumbley case. I said, Judge, what do you think the sentence would be with these facts and these convictions, 4 involuntary manslaughter convictions? He didn't even hesitate. He said credit for time served about six months, upwards of about 2 years, depending on their prior history. What's the prior history? I told him the prior history. He said probably 6 months to 2 years, right? I didn't tell him it was about the Crumbley case. Then when I told him about it was the Crumbley cases, he stepped back and said, it's a problem because obviously everybody's watching it, and so it's a difficult spot for that judge. I don't envy that judge. Michael, these judges run for elections. This judge lives in that community. Everybody's watching her. She knows there's nothing she can do to bring these kids back, but everybody in that community is going to remember what she did. The sentencing guidelines in Michigan are not mandatory for these judges. Theoretically, she could get them 60 years. That would be so unprecedented and so heinous that it would be brought back on appeal. But theoretically, she could do that, right? The sentencing guidelines are not required by these judges in Michigan. Up until a few years ago, they were required. Now they are merely guideposts, right? A judge could deviate from it. Unfortunately, I think the judge is going to deviate in this instance because of the fact that everybody's looking at her. And I'm sorry to bring up the fact that she's running for re-election. It's just, I'm analyzing the case. I got to call it as I see it. I don't know this judge personally, but if I was in the quiet of her mind, that's got to play a big factor, right? And the allocution and the witnesses that are going to come in and the family and the victim impact statements, that's going to play a role. She's going to have to go above the sentencing guidelines on this one. I'm not saying that's right, but she's going to have to do it. It's more traumatic for the fact that the mom literally had nothing to do with buying that gun. She just was a roommate of her husband by that point. She had another relationship. He bought the gun 4 days before the crime happened, the tragedy. This really sucks for her. They both had really good attorneys, both the mom and the dad, but I think the judge is going to have to deviate from the sentencing guidelines and sentence them to more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, basically, the prosecution argued back that such a sentence as is being asked for, the 2.5 years, which means they would walk out, will be a slap in the face to the victims. I would tend to agree. The safe bet, Michael, for me, is just stick to the suggestion, which is 7 years, 7.5 years or so. That would be the safe bet. But you're right. I think in this case, she may need to or want to go over that to closer to what the prosecution wants at 10.